Nahlis had cleaned the ceremonial hall 3 times already, and his 4 ears were still twitching with worry. The small, furry Felkai stood on a stepping platform to reach the welcome console, checking the arrivals list one more time. Every major species in the Galactic Union had already docked at the Athenaeum Ring, the great neutral station floating at the center of 5-star systems. The Valani were here. The Marathi were here. Even the Torvans, with their massive warships and their terrible reputation, were already settled in their quarters. But there was one name left on the list, one species that nobody really knew. Humans. Nahlis pulled up the file on them. It was thin, almost embarrassingly thin. The Galactic Union had only discovered humanity 30 cycles ago, when their strange, rough, faster-than-light signals had been picked up on the edge of charted space. They came from a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. They had been invited to the Centennial Peace Accord as a gesture of goodwill. A formality, really. Nobody expected much from them. A deep alarm chimed through the station. A ship was dropping out of hyperspace. Nahlis turned to the observation window and felt his stomach drop. The ship that appeared was not like anything else docked at the station. Galactic vessels were smooth, curved, and bright, designed to look graceful. This ship was none of those things. It was dark. It was angular. Its hull was covered in thick plates of metal that had clearly been damaged and repaired many times over. Long scratches ran across its belly. Scorch marks blackened its edges. Entire panels had been replaced with slightly different colored metal, giving it a patchwork look, like the skin of an animal that had survived too many fights. Every sensor on the station screamed to life. Warning lights flickered across a dozen control rooms. Officers from 3 different species turned to their commanders with the same question on their faces. Is that a warship? It was not. It was the HSS Horizon, a standard human exploration vessel. It simply looked like that because humans built things to last, and the Horizon had lasted through quite a lot. The docking clamps engaged, and the main airlock hissed open. Tejo stepped out first. He was tall for a human, with broad shoulders and a calm, steady face. He wore a dark, formal suit, simple, clean, no decorations. Behind him walked Yuna, the team's translator, holding a data tablet and smiling politely. Then came Hana, the biologist, her eyes already wide with excitement as she looked around the alien station. Soman, the medic, walked beside her, a heavy bag slung over one shoulder. And at the back, slightly apart from the others, walked Jiho. Jiho was the head of security. He was taller than Tejo, with a long scar running across his jaw. His eyes moved constantly, scanning every corridor, every shadow, every door. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply watched. The humans walked in a tight group, shoulder to shoulder, moving in step. This was normal for them. On Earth, diplomatic teams always moved in close formation. It was a security protocol, nothing more. But to the aliens watching from the corridor windows, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like a pack of predators moving through unfamiliar territory. A group of Felkai aides pressed themselves flat against the wall as the humans passed. A Marathi guard clicked her mandibles nervously and adjusted her weapon. Even a pair of Torvan soldiers, each one nearly 3 meters tall and covered in natural armor, shifted uncomfortably as the humans walked by. Tejo noticed none of this. He was focused on making a good first impression. The delegation reached the main hall, where Counselor Dreth was waiting. Dreth was a Valani, tall, thin, with skin so pale it was almost translucent. He was over 400 years old, and had seen more peace summits than most species had generations. Very little surprised him anymore. But when the humans entered the hall, he felt something cold settle in his chest. It was their eyes. Every species in the Galactic Union knew what forward-facing eyes meant. It meant predator. Hunters had eyes on the front of their heads so they could track prey. Prey species had eyes on the sides of their heads so they could watch for danger. The humans all had their eyes locked forward, and every single pair was pointed directly at him. Dreth kept his composure. He extended a thin, delicate hand in the Vellani gesture of welcome. Yuna stepped forward and bowed deeply, lowering her head until her neck was fully exposed. She had practiced this greeting for weeks, hoping it would show respect and humility. On Earth, bowing was one of the most respectful gestures a person could offer. But this was not Earth. In Vellani culture, exposing the neck was a threat display. It meant, I am so confident that I could kill you, that I do not even need to protect my most vulnerable point. It was the gesture of a warrior so powerful that they feared nothing. Dreth's pale skin flickered with a faint blue, the Vellani sign of fear. He managed a thin smile and took a step back. Yuna straightened up, still smiling warmly. She had no idea what she had just communicated. Behind her, Hana spotted Ambassador Loka, a Marathi delegate with iridescent wings and sharp mandibles. Hana's face lit up with pure scientific delight. She walked over and extended her hand for a handshake. Loka stared at the outstretched hand. In Marathi culture, reaching out to grasp another being's limb was a dominance challenge. It was how Marathi began ritual combat. The human woman was standing there, smiling with her teeth, her visible omnivore teeth, and offering to grab Loka's arm. Loka took a careful step backward and folded her wings tight against her body in a defensive posture. Hana lowered her hand, still cheerful. She assumed the ambassador simply did not shake hands, and made a mental note to ask about Marathi greetings later. At the back of the group, Jiho stood perfectly still, arms crossed, watching the room. He had not said a word since leaving the ship. His eyes tracked every movement, every alien, every exit. This was his job. He was good at it. Nahlis watched all of this from behind a decorative pillar, his small hands gripping his data tablet so tightly that the screen cracked slightly. He turned to a fellow Felkai aide standing beside him. They move like predators, Nahlis whispered, his voice barely a breath, and they do not even know it. The other aide said nothing. She was too busy watching Jiho, who had just turned his head and looked directly at them, as if he had heard the whisper from across the entire hall. He probably had not. Probably. The welcoming banquet was held in the largest hall on the Athenaeum ring, a vast room with a ceiling made of living crystal that shifted colors with the mood of the crowd. Right now, the crystals were a pale, nervous yellow. Long tables stretched across the hall, each one set with dishes from every attending species. The Vellani had brought their traditional light broth, which glowed faintly and smelled like morning rain. The Marathi had prepared a tray of small, still-living organisms that wriggled gently on the plate, a delicacy meant to be consumed alive. The Torvans had brought dense cubes of compressed protein, gray and flavorless, because Torvans did not care about taste. They cared about efficiency. And then there were the humans. Taeho had asked Yuna to arrange a small selection of Korean food for the banquet. Nothing fancy, he had said, just something from home. So, Yuna had prepared 3 simple dishes: white rice, bulgogi, and kimchi. The rice arrived first. Nobody had a problem with the rice. It was plain and white and harmless. Several alien delegates even found it pleasant. For a brief, beautiful moment, the evening seemed like it might go smoothly. Then Yuna opened the container of kimchi. The smell hit the room like a wall. It was sharp, tangy, and deeply fermented, the kind of smell that announced itself from across a building. Humans loved it. They had been fermenting vegetables for thousands of years, and kimchi was one of their proudest creations. The aliens did not see it that way. Fermentation, to most galactic species, was not cooking, it was decay. The Villani, with their extremely sensitive chemical receptors, immediately identified the kimchi as organic matter in an advanced state of bacterial decomposition. In simple terms, the humans had brought rotting plants to a formal dinner, and were now spooning them happily onto their plates. 3 Felkai delegates at a nearby table quietly gagged. A Marathi official turned her head away, her wings buzzing in distress. Even Councillor Dreth, who had survived 400 years of diplomatic dinners, gripped the edge of the table and focused very hard on breathing through his mouth. Hana took a big bite of kimchi and rice and made a small, happy sound. She noticed a Felkai staring at her and smiled. "Would you like to try some?" she asked brightly. The Felkai did not answer. He had fainted. But the kimchi was only the beginning. Wanjin, the captain of the Horizon, carried the bulgogi to the table himself. He set down the large metal tray with a proud grin. The thin slices of beef had been marinated in soy sauce, sesame oil, garlic, and sugar, then grilled over open flame until the edges were dark and slightly charred. Steam rose from the dish. The rich, smoky smell of cooked meat spread through the hall. The room went very, very quiet. Several species in the Galactic Union ate meat. The Torvans, for example, consumed raw flesh as part of their diet. But no species in the recorded history of the galaxy cooked their meat with fire. Fire was a force of destruction. It was used to burn forests, to sterilize plague zones, to destroy enemy fortifications. The idea of using fire to prepare food was so alien to the galactic community that there was no word for it in any of their languages. And yet, here the humans sat, casually eating flesh that had been burned by open flame, using small metal sticks to pick up the pieces and place them in their mouths, chewing with obvious enjoyment. General Rook, the Torvan military commander, sat across the hall. He was nearly 3 meters tall, covered in thick green-gray scales, with a jaw that could crush stone. He was considered the most dangerous warrior in the Galactic Union. He had led fleets into battle and burned colonies to ash. Very few things in the universe made Rook uncomfortable. He set down his protein cube and stared at the humans. They were using fire on their food and smiling while they did it. Rook said nothing for a very long time. Midway through the dinner, Salmon excused herself to answer a call from the ship. She stood up, pushed her chair back, and walked toward the corridor. As she passed through the doorway, she stretched, rolling her neck to one side until the joints popped loudly, then cracking her knuckles, one by one. It was a habit. Humans sat in chairs for too long, and their joints got stiff. Cracking them was harmless, even pleasant. Salmon did it without thinking. 2 Marathi guards were standing in the corridor. They both heard the sound, and froze completely. The popping, cracking noise that Salmon's joints had made was almost identical to the Marathi pre-combat exoskeleton lock, the sound a Marathi warrior's body made when its external armor plates sealed into fighting position. It was a sound that meant one thing. Someone was about to fight to the death. The 2 guards looked at each other. Then they looked at Salmon, a small human woman walking calmly down the corridor, humming a song to herself, apparently unaware that she had just made the most aggressive war sound in Marathi biology. One of the guards immediately contacted Ambassador Loka. "The human medic," he reported, his voice tight with tension. "She has locked into combat position." Loka's wings vibrated with alarm. "Are you certain? I heard the locks engage myself." Back in the banquet hall, Jiho stood behind Teho's chair like a statue. He had not moved since the meal began. He had not eaten. He had not spoken. His arms were crossed over his chest, and his eyes moved slowly across the room in a steady, unbroken pattern. Left to right to left, up, down, every face, every hand, every exit. This was completely normal for a human bodyguard. On Earth, close protection officers did not eat during formal events. They stayed alert. They watched. It was their job. But the aliens did not know this. What they saw was a species that apparently had a dedicated warrior class, individuals who did not participate in communal meals, who stood apart from their group, who remained in a state of constant readiness even during a celebration of peace. To the Volani, this suggested a level of military discipline that bordered on frightening. To the Torvans, it suggested something worse. A species that was always prepared for war, even when there was no war to prepare for. The banquet ended 2 hours earlier than planned. Most delegations made polite excuses and left quickly. The humans, confused but not offended, helped clean up. Hana carefully packed the leftover kimchi, hoping to share it at breakfast. After the hall emptied, Counselor Dreth called an emergency closed session. Every delegation leader gathered in a sealed chamber. Every leader except the humans, who had not been invited. Dreth stood at the center of the room, his translucent skin pale with worry. "We need to discuss the humans," he said. Ambassador Loka spoke first, their medic prepared for combat in a public corridor, unprovoked. General Rook spoke second. His deep voice was unusually quiet. "They cook with fire." Nahus, sitting in the corner with his cracked tablet, added one small note to the official record. He wrote it in tiny letters, almost as if he was afraid someone might read it. "They brought rotting food to a peace dinner," he wrote. "And they enjoyed it." The crystals on the ceiling had turned a deep, anxious red. Nobody disagreed with them. The negotiation chamber was shaped like a circle, with tall seats rising in tiers around the central speaking platform. Every species had its own section, marked with banners and symbols. The Volani section was silver and blue. The Torvan section was black iron. The Marathi section shimmered with patterns that only insectoid eyes could fully see. And at the far end, in a section that had been hastily prepared the night before, the human delegation sat in plain chairs behind a simple table. Tejo stood at the speaking platform and looked out at the room. Dozens of alien faces looked back at him, some curious, some nervous, many afraid, though he did not know this. He cleared his throat and began. "Thank you for inviting us," he said. His voice was steady and calm. "Humanity is honored to be here. We have prepared a proposal for full cooperation between Earth and the Galactic Union. We would like to share it with you now." Yuna stood and began handing out copies of the proposal to each delegation. The document was 8 pages long, printed on plain white paper, written in clear and direct language. It covered everything: open borders, shared technology, mutual defense agreements, trade routes, cultural exchange programs. Tejo had spent months writing it. He was proud of how clear and simple it was. The aliens stared at the document in confusion. Galactic treaties were not written like this. A standard galactic agreement was hundreds of pages long, filled with ceremonial language, ritual phrases, historical references, and symbolic gestures that could take weeks to properly decode. The process of negotiation itself was supposed to last days, sometimes weeks, with the first several sessions dedicated entirely to formal greetings, ancestral acknowledgments, and carefully structured posturing. Tejo had skipped all of that. He had walked up to the platform and immediately started talking about terms. To the humans, this was efficiency. To the aliens, this was something else entirely. A species that did not bother with ceremony. A species that walked into a room full of galactic powers and simply stated what it wanted, as if it already considered itself an equal. Or worse, a superior. Counselor Dreth read the first page of the proposal, and felt the cold feeling in his chest grow heavier. The document was not rude, it was not aggressive. It was polite, reasonable, and well organized, and that somehow made it more unsettling, because it meant the humans were not trying to intimidate anyone. They simply did not consider the possibility that they needed to be careful. Ambassador Loka leaned toward her aide and whispered, "They do not negotiate. They dictate." The session continued. Taeho explained each section of the proposal with patience and clarity. He answered questions directly. When he did not know the answer to something, he said so honestly and promised to find out. This kind of open honesty was extremely rare in galactic politics, where admitting ignorance was considered a weakness. But Taeho did it without any hesitation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Midway through the third hour, the station shook. It was a small seismic tremor, a natural occurrence near the gravitational center of 5 star systems. The Athenaeum ring experienced minor tremors regularly. They were harmless, but they were still unsettling, especially for species that lived on stable worlds. The crystal ceiling rattled. Tables vibrated. Data tablets slid across surfaces. A low, deep rumble rolled through the walls and floor. The Villani delegation froze, their translucent skin flickering with alarm. The Felkai aides dropped to the floor and covered their heads. The Marathi guards activated their exoskeleton locks with loud cracks, preparing for danger. Even the Torvans shifted in their seats, their clawed hands reaching instinctively for weapons that were not there. The humans did nothing. Taeho paused mid-sentence. He glanced up at the ceiling for half a second. Then he looked back down at his notes and continued talking. Yuna steadied her water glass with one hand, without looking at it. Hana stopped writing in her notebook for a moment, waited for the shaking to stop, and then resumed. Somin adjusted the strap on her medical bag. Jiho shifted his weight from one foot to the other. That was the entire human reaction to the ground shaking beneath them. The chamber was silent, except for Taeho's voice, still calmly explaining Section 4 of the proposal. Every alien in the room had the same thought at the same time. What kind of world do these creatures come from, where the ground shaking is not a reason to be alarmed? General Rook had been watching the humans carefully all morning. He had not spoken yet. He had been waiting, studying, trying to understand them. Now he decided it was time to test them. He stood up. When a Torvan stands to full height, it is not a small event. Rook was nearly 3 meters tall. His body was covered in thick, armored scales. His neck plates, wide, sharp-edged bone structures that framed his head, flared outward in the traditional Torvan dominance display. It was a gesture that said, "I am larger than you. I am the most dangerous thing in this room." Every other species in the chamber immediately went quiet. The Felkai pressed themselves into their seats. The Marathi folded their wings tight. Even Dreth, who had known Ruok for decades, felt his skin flicker. Ruok looked down at Taeho and spoke in his deep, grinding voice. "Your proposal suggests a mutual defense agreement. You are a small species from a single planet. What exactly do you think you can defend?" It was a challenge. Everyone in the room knew it. In Torvan culture, this was the moment where the other party was supposed to either submit or respond with their own display of power. Taeho looked up at Ruok. He was more than a full meter shorter than the Torvan general. He had no armor, no claws, no plates, no natural weapons of any kind. He was a soft, fragile-looking creature in a plain dark suit. And he smiled. "That is a fair point," Taeho said warmly. "Let us discuss it." Rook stared at him. On Torva, smiling in response to a dominance display had a very specific meaning. It meant the other person considered the challenge so far beneath them that it did not even deserve a serious response. It was the ultimate dismissal, the gesture of a being so powerful, so confident in its own superiority, that a 3-meter armored warrior, flaring his combat plates, was simply not interesting enough to worry about. Taeho did not know any of this. He was just being friendly. Rook slowly sat back down. His neck plates folded flat against his head. He said nothing else for the rest of the session. 1 hour later, the power went out. It happened without warning. Every light in the chamber died at once. The crystal ceiling went dark. The hum of the station systems fell silent. For 11 seconds, the negotiation chamber was in complete, absolute darkness. The alien delegations reacted immediately. The Villani dropped to the floor. The Felkai screamed. The Marathi guards surrounded their ambassador, exoskeletons locking into combat position with sharp cracks. The Torvans formed a defensive circle, their claws extended, their eyes searching the darkness for threats. 11 seconds of chaos. 11 seconds of fear. Then the emergency lights came on, dim, red, casting long shadows across the chamber. The aliens looked around the room, hearts pounding, bodies shaking. The humans were exactly where they had been before the lights went out. Tejo was still standing at the speaking platform, his hands resting on his notes. Yuna was still in her seat, her posture unchanged. Hana had her notebook open on her lap. Somin had activated a small flashlight from her medical bag and was holding it up calmly, its white beam cutting through the red emergency glow. Jiho had his hand resting on his sidearm. His eyes were moving through the room with the same steady scanning motion as always. Left to right, right to left. He looked exactly as alert as he had before the blackout, which meant either the darkness had not affected him at all, or he was always this ready for something to go wrong. Both possibilities were terrifying. At Yuna's feet, Nahlis was curled into a tight ball, all 4 ears pressed flat against his head. When the lights had gone out, he had panicked and grabbed onto the nearest solid thing, which had been Yuna's arm. She had not flinched. She had simply placed her other hand on top of his head and held him gently until the emergency lights came on. She was still holding him now, patting his fur softly, whispering, "It is okay. It is okay. Just a power issue. Nothing to worry about." The chamber was silent. Every alien in the room was staring at the humans. Tejo looked up from his notes, glanced around at the scattered, crouching, shaking delegations, and spoke in the same calm, steady voice he had been using all morning. "Shall we continue?" Nobody answered for a very long time. The council chamber was sealed. Armed guards stood at every entrance. The session had been classified at the highest level. No records, no transmissions, no leaks. Every delegation leader was present. Every delegation leader except the humans, who were wandering the station's recreation wing, completely unaware that an emergency meeting had been called about them. Counselor Dreth stood in the center of the room. His skin was pale, paler than usual, and it had not stopped flickering since the power outage. He held a data tablet in his thin hands and looked at the gathered leaders with an expression that none of them had seen on his face in 400 years. Fear. "I have compiled a biological report on the human species," Dreth said. His voice was quiet but steady. "The information comes from standard medical scans taken during their arrival, as well as data from their own public records, which they have made freely available." He paused. "I want to warn you, this report is difficult." He activated the display. The first image showed a human skeleton. It was unremarkable to look at. A bipedal frame, 2 arms, 2 legs, a central spine. But the data beside it told a different story. "Humans are persistence predators," Dreth said. "On their homeworld, they did not evolve to be the fastest or the strongest. Instead, they evolved to chase their prey over enormous distances, across entire continents, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They can walk and run for days without stopping. Their bodies cool themselves through a liquid excretion called sweat, which allows them to remain active long after other species would overheat and die." The room was quiet. "Their eyes are binocular and forward-facing," Dreth continued. "This is a predator trait. They have depth perception designed for tracking moving targets. Their hearing is moderate, but their pattern recognition is extraordinary. They can detect threats from visual and audio information that other species would miss entirely. He changed the display. The new image showed a human arm, broken and then healed. Their bodies repair themselves, Drax said. Broken bones refuse. Torn skin regenerates. They can lose significant amounts of blood and survive. They can lose non-vital internal organs and continue to function. Their immune systems are aggressive. Their bodies are in a constant state of internal war against billions of microorganisms that live inside them. They carry more bacteria in their bodies than they have cells of their own. A Felkai delegate made a small, horrified sound. And when they are placed under physical or emotional stress, Dreth said, his voice dropping lower, their bodies produce a chemical called adrenaline. This chemical increases their heart rate, sharpens their senses, dulls their ability to feel pain, and temporarily increases their physical strength and speed. He let that settle. Under threat, Dreth said carefully, humans do not become weaker. They become stronger. Ambassador Loka stood. Her wings were pressed flat against her back, a Marathi sign of deep unease. I have my own report to present, she said. It concerns human history. She activated her own display. It showed images from Earth's past, cities in ruins, fields scarred by explosions, ships sinking in dark oceans. Humans engage in a behavior they call war, Loka said. This is not a territorial skirmish. This is not a border dispute. This is organized, systematic, large-scale conflict involving millions of individuals, advanced weapons, and entire economies dedicated to destruction. They have done this repeatedly throughout their history. They have done this to each other. She paused to let the chamber absorb this. They have weapons capable of destroying entire cities in a single moment, Loka continued. They built these weapons, and then they used them, on their own kind, on their own planet. And after using these weapons, they did not stop. They built more. They built better ones. And then, and this is the part I find most disturbing, they signed agreements with each other, promising not to use them. They kept the weapons, Loka said. They simply promised not to use them. And for the most part, they kept that promise. Which means they are a species capable of building the ultimate destructive force, holding it in their hands, and choosing not to use it. That requires a level of discipline that I am not comfortable thinking about. General Rook had been silent through both presentations. He sat in his massive chair, his clawed hands resting on his knees, his neck plates flat. When Loka finished, the room turned to him. Rook was the most experienced military leader in the Galactic Union. If anyone could put this in perspective, it was him. Rook was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. I have commanded fleets, he said. His voice was low, almost a rumble. I have burned worlds. I have fought species that were faster than me, species that were stronger than me, species that had better weapons and better ships. But I have never, not once, fought a species that wages war on itself and calls it progress. The chamber was completely silent. I watched their leader today, Rook continued. The one called Teho. I challenged him. I stood to my full height. I displayed. And he smiled at me. He smiled and he said, let us discuss it. Rook's jaw tightened. Either he is the bravest individual I have ever met, or he genuinely did not understand that I was threatening him. I do not know which answer frightens me more. While the council sat in their sealed chamber and tried to understand what humanity was, the humans themselves were having a perfectly pleasant afternoon. Hannah had found Nollis in the recreation wing and was showing him photographs from Earth on her personal tablet. She swiped through images with genuine pride, towering mountains capped with snow, vast blue oceans, thick green forests, sweeping deserts, and volcanoes erupting against orange sunsets. This is the Pacific Ocean, she said happily. It covers almost a third of our planet. And this is Mount Hala. It is a volcano on an island in my country. Is it not beautiful? Nolus stared at the images, with all four ears pinned back. He saw a world of violent geological activity, extreme temperature variations, massive bodies of water that could swallow entire civilizations, and active volcanoes that the humans apparently live next to on purpose. The Felkai homeworld was a gentle place. Mild temperatures, soft rains, rolling plains. Nolus had never seen a planet that looked like it was actively trying to kill everything on it. It is very dramatic, Nolus managed. Thank you, Hana said, completely missing his tone. In the gym area, Wanjin had challenged a group of Torvan soldiers to an arm wrestling match. He had seen them training, and thought it would be a fun way to make friends. The Torvans had agreed, mostly out of confusion. Wanjin lost every single match. The Torvans were physically much stronger. Each one could crush a human with minimal effort. Wanjin laughed every time he lost, shook his sore arm, and asked for another round. The Torvans did not know what to do with this. On their world, challenging someone to physical combat and then losing was deeply shameful. But Wanjin did not seem ashamed. He seemed to be genuinely enjoying himself. He was willingly, happily putting himself against opponents twice his size, losing and then coming back for more. As if the losing did not matter. As if the fight itself was the point. This disturbed the Torvans far more than if he had won. Down in the maintenance corridor, Salman found a Felkai worker with a cut on his arm from the power outage. The wound was not serious, but it was bleeding, and the worker looked scared. Salman knelt beside him, opened her medical bag, cleaned the wound, applied antiseptic, and wrapped it in a clean bandage. She worked quickly and efficiently, her hands steady and sure. The Felkai worker watched her with wide eyes. "You carry medical supplies with you everywhere?" he asked. Salman shrugged. "Humans get hurt a lot," she said simply. "It is better to be ready." This small detail, that humans were so accustomed to injury that even their non-combat members carried medical equipment at all times, spread through the station within an hour. Late that evening, Teho found Dreth alone on an observation deck, staring out at the stars. Teho stood beside him and said nothing for a while. Then he spoke quietly. "I want to be honest with you, counselor. We are nervous. My people have never been to something like this before. We do not know your customs. We do not know your traditions. We are afraid that we are making mistakes." Dreth turned and looked at the human. Teho's forward-facing predator eyes were soft, almost gentle. His hands were clasped in front of him, a vulnerable, open posture. The most terrifying species Dreth had ever studied was standing beside him, worried about being rude. Dreth returned to the council chamber an hour later. He stood before the gathered leaders and said something that changed the tone of every conversation that followed. "They are not conquerors," Dreth said quietly. "They do not even know what they are." The final morning of the peace accord began quietly. Delegations filed into the negotiation chamber with tired faces and careful steps. 3 days of fear, confusion, and emergency meetings had drained everyone. The crystal ceiling hung in a flat, exhausted gray. Even the Torvan soldiers standing guard looked weary. Teho and his team took their seats at the human table. Yuna organized her notes. Hana opened her notebook to a fresh page. Somin set her medical bag under her chair, close enough to grab in a second. Jiho stood behind them, arms crossed, eyes already moving across the room. Dreth called the session to order. He had prepared a final statement, a careful diplomatic speech that would welcome humanity into the Galactic Union as a junior member with limited observation rights. It was a safe, measured decision, the kind of decision that would not frighten anyone. He never got to deliver it. The first alarm came at exactly 9 minutes past the hour, a sharp, piercing tone that cut through the chamber and silenced every voice. Red lights began flashing along the walls. Station officers rushed to their consoles. A fleet had dropped out of hyperspace. 3 warships, Torvan in design, heavy-armored, weapons-powered. They were not part of the Union fleet. They belonged to a splinter faction, loyalists of a deposed Torvan warlord, who had been exiled 2 decades ago. The warlord was dead, but his followers were not, and they had chosen this moment, with every galactic leader gathered in one place, to make their stand. A broadcast cut through every speaker on the station. The voice was deep, rough, and full of fury. "This is Commander Harkle of the true Torvan fleet. The Athenaeum Ring and all delegates aboard are now under our authority. You will accept our terms, or this station will be reduced to dust. You have 1 hour." Panic hit the chamber like a wave. The Felkai delegates screamed and ran for the exits. The Marathi guards locked their exoskeletons and surrounded Ambassador Loka. The Volani aides clustered around Dreth, their skin flashing white with terror. Even General Rook, who had fought in a dozen wars, stood with his jaw tight and his claws out. He knew those ships. He knew what they could do. The station's defense fleet was small and unprepared. It would not be enough. Evacuation orders were issued. Delegations began rushing toward docking bays. In the middle of the chaos, Teho's communicator beeped. It was Wanjin calling from the horizon. "Captain here," he said, his voice flat and steady. "I am watching 3 hostile ships on our sensors. The station fleet is scrambling, but they are outnumbered. What do you want to do?" Yuna had stopped organizing her notes. Her hands were still, and her eyes were locked on his. Hana had closed her notebook and was gripping it tightly. Soman had already pulled her medical bag onto her shoulder. Jiho had not moved at all. He was watching Teho, waiting. Teho did not give a speech. He did not raise his voice, or clench his fist, or say anything dramatic. He simply said, "We should help." That was all. 4 words. And every member of his team nodded, as if they had already known. 3 minutes later, the HSS Horizon undocked from the station and powered its engines. The old, scarred patchwork ship moved out of the docking ring and positioned itself directly between the Athenaeum Ring and the 3 hostile warships. Every alien watching from the station windows saw the same thing. A single human vessel, smaller and older than any of the enemy ships, flying straight toward danger without hesitation. Wanjin opened a broadcast on all channels. His voice was calm, almost bored, as if he were reading a weather report. "This is Captain Wanjin of the human ship Horizon. You are threatening a peace summit attended by representatives of dozens of species, including mine. Stand down and withdraw. This is your only warning." The Splinter Fleet did not respond. Instead, they scanned the horizon. The scan results confused them. The horizon's hull was made of dense, reinforced alloy, far heavier than standard galactic construction. Every inch of it was scarred, patched, and repaired. The ship had clearly survived dozens of engagements, collisions, and environmental hazards, and it was still flying. But more alarming were the biological readings from inside. The human crew's heart rates were elevated. Their adrenaline levels were spiking. Their body temperatures were rising. And their coordination was improving. Under stress, the human crew was not falling apart. They were getting sharper, more precise. Every system on the horizon was being operated at peak efficiency, not by computers, but by the crew themselves, whose bodies were chemically adapting to the threat in real time. The Splinter Fleet hesitated. On the horizon's bridge, Jiho had taken control of the weapons systems. He did not fire. Instead, he activated targeting locks on all 3 enemy ships simultaneously. 3 red targeting indicators appeared on the hostile vessels, 1 on each ship, steady and unblinking. In galactic naval combat, a targeting lock was a message. It meant, "I see you, I can reach you. I am choosing not to kill you right now. It was the space equivalent of placing a blade against someone's throat and waiting. Jiho held the locks. His hands were steady. His breathing was even. He waited. 30 seconds passed. Then the lead splinter ship fired. A bright energy bolt streaked across the void and struck the horizon on its port side. The ship shuddered. Alarms screamed. Sparks erupted from a ruptured conduit on the bridge. 2 crew members were thrown from their stations. Solman was already moving. She crossed the bridge in 3 steps, dropped to her knees beside the injured crew members, and began working, checking pulses, stopping bleeding, stabilizing spines. Her hands did not shake. Hana grabbed a console that had gone dark and began rerouting power, following Wanjin's rapid instructions. She was not an engineer. She did not fully understand what she was doing, but she listened, she learned, and she adapted in seconds. Wanjin pulled the horizon hard to starboard, placing the ship directly between the station and the enemy fleet. He was using his own vessel as a shield. The move was instinctive. It was not tactical genius. It was the simple, ancient human reflex of putting yourself between danger and the people behind you. The station shook from the energy wave of the impact. Inside the negotiation chamber, the remaining alien delegates watched the battle on the main display screen. They saw the human ship take the hit. They saw it shudder and spark. And then they saw it hold position, not retreating, not running, absorbing the blow and staying exactly where it was. Teiho's voice came over every speaker on the station. He had patched into the open broadcast channel. He was not speaking to the aliens on the station. He was speaking to the Splinter Fleet. "That was your one," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that filled the room. "The next move is ours." There was no anger in his voice, no fear, no bluffing. It was a statement of simple fact, delivered with the calm certainty of a species that had survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and the death of its own sun's stability, and was still here. The station's defense fleet, which had been scrambling in disarray, suddenly found its nerve. Officers who had been frozen at their consoles began issuing orders. Ships that had been retreating reversed course. The defense fleet formed up behind the horizon and flanked the splinter ships from 2 sides. Faced with a coordinated response and a species they did not understand, Commander Harkle made the only smart decision he had ever made. The 3 splinter ships powered down their weapons and jumped to hyperspace. They were gone in seconds. The horizon drifted in the silence that followed. Smoke trailed from its port side. A new scar had been added to its collection. 20 minutes later, the humans docked and walked back into the negotiation chamber. They looked tired. Somin had blood on her sleeves, not her own. Wanjin was rubbing his shoulder where he had been thrown against his chair. Hana's hands were shaking slightly, though she was trying to hide it. Jiho walked at the back, as always, his face completely unreadable. Teiho crossed the chamber, pulled out his chair, sat down, opened his folder, and looked up at the assembled delegates. "Now," he said, "where were we?" The room was silent for a long time. Then General Rook stood. The massive Torvon crossed the chamber with slow, heavy steps, each one echoing off the floor. He stopped in front of Teiho and looked down at the human. For a moment, nobody breathed. Rook lowered his head. He pressed his neck plates flat, exposing the soft, vulnerable skin of his throat. Then he placed his clawed fist over his chest. It was the Torvon right of equals, a gesture of absolute respect between warriors. In the entire history of the Galactic Union, Rook had never performed this ritual for any non-Torvon. Not once. Teiho stood and bowed in return, because that was what felt right. This time, nobody misunderstood. Counselor Dreth set aside his prepared speech. He walked to the center of the chamber and made an announcement that would be recorded in every history book across the galaxy. Humanity was entered into the Galactic Union Peace Accord, not as a junior member with observation rights, but as a full signatory with council consultation status, a rank that normally took centuries to earn. Nullis sat in his corner, his cracked tablet on his knees, recording the official minutes of the session. When he reached the end, he paused. His small hand hovered over the screen. Then, in the margins of history, he added a personal note, something no Felkai clerk had ever done in the official record. "They did not come to conquer," he wrote. "They did not come to intimidate. They came because they were invited. And when trouble arrived, they stood in front of it. I do not think they understand how extraordinary that is. Perhaps that is what makes them extraordinary." He saved the file and closed his tablet. On the horizon, the crew settled back into their routines. Hana sat cross-legged on the floor of the common room, reviewing her notes on alien biology with wide, excited eyes. Sulman restocked her medical bag, counting bandages and checking supplies with quiet focus. Jiho sat in the galley, eating a bowl of rice in silence, the first meal he had allowed himself since they arrived. Wonjin was in the cargo bay with a welding torch, patching the new hole in the hull, muttering to himself about how nobody ever approved his repair budgets. Teho stood at the observation window on the bridge, watching the stars drift past in slow, silent arcs. The Athenaeum ring glowed behind them, its crystal towers catching the light of 5 distant suns. Yuna walked up and stood beside him. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you think we made a good impression?" Teho thought about this. He thought about the bows and the handshakes, and the kimchi, and the power outage, and the tremor, and the smile, and the darkness, and the fire, and the battle, and the small, terrified Felkai who had grabbed Yuna's arm when the lights went out. "I think we were just ourselves," he said. Yuna laughed, a short, warm sound that echoed softly through the empty bridge. "That might be the scariest part," she said. Outside the window, the stars burned on, ancient and patient, making room for a strange new species that had stumbled onto the galactic stage with fire in their food, scars on their ship, and no idea how frightening they were. And somehow, that was exactly enough.